The fluorescent lights of the federal courthouse flickered slightly as David Chun sat in the witness box, his hand gripping the wooden rail so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Across the room, his daughter 16-year-old Maya Chun. No, wait. That's not right. Let me start this story the way it needs to be told. The fluorescent lights of the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon cast harsh shadows across the packed courtroom on that November morning in 2024. Every seat was filled. Media representatives lined the back wall. Sketch artists worked frantically at their pads. And in the gallery, two distinct groups sat separated by an invisible but impenetrable wall of grief and guilt. On one side, the families of 7 victims' mothers, fathers, siblings, all dressed in black, clutching photographs and tissues. On the other side, isolated and alone, Sarah Morrison sat with her head bowed, her sister's arm around her shoulders, both women crying silently. At the defense table, 17-year-old Jake Morrison sat in an orange jumpsuit that seemed too big for his slight frame. His light brown hair was cut short prison regulation, and his face, which neighbors had once described as sweet and boyish, now looked hollow and much older than his years. He stared straight ahead at nothing, his expression blank, as if he'd learned to turn off some essential part of himself. Public defender Marcus Reed stood at the lectern, about to call his next witness. The trial had been going on for 4 weeks, and everyone in that courtroom knew that the defense was losing badly. You can't really defend the indefensible. You can only try to explain it, to provide context, to beg for mercy in a situation where mercy seems obscene. The defense calls Robert Morrison to the stand, Reed announced, his voice betraying the exhaustion of a man who'd been fighting an uphill battle since day one. But it wasn't Robert Morrison who stood up. Sarah Morrison touched her ex-husband's arm and whispered something urgent. Robert, a former police officer whose career had been destroyed by this case, shook his head. He couldn't do it. Couldn't walk up there and testify on behalf of the son who'd used his gun to murder 7 people. There was confusion, a whispered conference at the defense table, and then Reed made a decision. Your Honor, we'd like to call Sarah Morrison instead. Sarah stood on shaking legs and walked to the witness stand. As she passed her son, Jake looked up at her for the first time that day. He smiled slightly, a small, confident smile that said, "Mom will save me. She always does." That smile would haunt Sarah Morrison for the rest of her life. She was sworn in, sat down, and Reed began his questioning. The script was clear, rehearsed over dozens of hours. Sarah was supposed to talk about Jake's difficult childhood, about his father's impossible standards, about the pressure he'd been under. She was supposed to make the jury see her son as a victim to a troubled child who'd made a catastrophic mistake but deserved a chance at redemption. Mrs. Morrison, Reed began gently. Can you tell the jury about Jake's upbringing? About the environment he grew up in? Sarah opened her mouth to deliver her rehearsed lines. But then she looked past Reed, looked at the gallery where Patricia Thompson sat, the mother of Olivia Thompson, the girl her son had hunted down and murdered in the school cafeteria. Patricia was holding a photograph of Olivia in her homecoming dress, the dress she'd been wearing the day she died. The photograph was splattered with dried tears, and something inside Sarah Morrison broke. Your Honor, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I can't do this. I can't lie anymore. Reed's face went pale. Mrs. Morrison, perhaps we should take a recess. No. Sarah's voice grew stronger. No more recesses. No more delays. These families deserve the truth. Jake deserves the truth. And I need to finally tell it. Judge Patricia Hendricks leaned forward, her expression stern but not unkind. Mrs. Morrison, do you understand that you're under oath? That anything you say can affect your son's case? I understand. Sarah looked directly at Jake now, and for the first time, her son's confident expression faltered. I've spent 17 years protecting him, enabling him, making excuses for him, and 7 people are dead because I didn't stop him when I could have. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Hendricks banged her gavel. Order. Mrs. Morrison, you may proceed. What followed was not testimony, it was a confession. Sarah Morrison, her voice breaking repeatedly but never stopping, told the truth about her son that she'd been hiding from everyone, including herself, for years. Jake had always been different, she explained. Even as a toddler, he'd shown an unsettling lack of empathy. When his hamster died when he was 6, he'd wanted to dissect it to see how it worked. When neighborhood cats went missing, Sarah had found their collars hidden in Jake's room. When he was 10, another student at school had been badly injured in what everyone called an accident on the playground, but Sarah had found Jake's journal entry describing how he'd carefully loosened the bolts on the swing set. I told myself he was just curious, Sarah sobbed. Just a smart boy trying to understand the world. I made excuses. I always made excuses. She described how Robert's strict parenting had made things worse, creating a pressure cooker environment. But she also admitted that Jake had used that to his advantage, playing the victim, manipulating her sympathy to avoid consequences for increasingly disturbing behavior. He was smart, Sarah said, her voice hollow now. So smart. He knew exactly what to say to make me believe him, to make everyone believe him. The helpful neighbor boy, the Eagle Scout candidate, the quiet kid who never caused trouble. It was all an act, and I helped him perfect it. Jake's face had transformed from confident to shocked to furious. His hands clenched into fists. His breathing became rapid and shallow. Reed tried to object, tried to stop this disaster, but Judge Hendricks overruled him. The witness had the right to testify truthfully. Sarah described finding Jake's internet search history 3 months before the shooting searches about previous school shootings, about how to access gun safes, about police response times. I confronted him. He said it was for a school project on violence prevention. I wanted to believe him so badly that I did. God help me, I believed him. She talked about the morning of October 15th, how Jake had hugged her goodbye, something he rarely did. How he'd told Emily he loved her. How she'd felt a strange sense of foreboding, but had pushed it away because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging what her son really was. When the school called, when they said there was a shooting, my first thought wasn't worry for Jake. It was dread. Because somewhere deep inside, I knew it was him. And I still didn't want to believe it. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for Sarah's voice and her sobs. Even the sketch artists had stopped drawing, transfixed by this mother's terrible confession. Then Sarah turned in her chair to face her son directly. Jake, I love you. I will always love you. But you are not the victim here. You murdered 7 people. You planned it for months. You enjoyed it. And I failed every single person in this room by not stopping you when I saw the signs. Jake exploded. He shot to his feet, his chair crashing backward. Shut up, he screamed, his carefully maintained facade finally shattering completely. You were supposed to help me. You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in your life, I'm truly on your side. Because the only way you can ever become anything other than a monster is if someone finally tells you the truth. And the truth is that you are responsible for this. Not your father, not the school, not society. You. 3 bailiffs moved in to restrain Jake as he lunged toward the witness stand. His face was contorted with rage, all pretense of the misunderstood teenager gone. I hate you, he screamed as they pulled him back. I hate you. You're supposed to love me. I do love you, Sarah whispered. But Jake was still screaming, drowning out her words. You're weak. You've always been weak. I should have killed you too. I should have killed all of you. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hendricks banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Jake was dragged from the courtroom, still screaming threats and obscenities. His voice echoed down the hallway even after the doors closed behind him. In the chaos, Sarah Morrison sat in the witness box, her body shaking with sobs, having just done the hardest thing a mother could ever do, choosing truth over love, justice over protection, 7 strangers' children over her own. But to understand how we got to this moment, how a 17-year-old boy from a quiet suburban neighborhood became one of America's youngest mass murderers, how a mother came to testify against her own son, we need to go back. Back to before the shooting, before the trial, back to a time when everyone still believed that Jake Morrison was just the helpful boy next door. We need to go back to the beginning. 18 months before that courtroom breakdown, Jake Morrison was living a life that looked perfect from the outside. The Morrison family home at 247 Oakwood Drive in the Maplewood neighborhood of Portland was the kind of place that appeared in real estate brochures. A 2-story colonial with white siding, black shutters, and a meticulously maintained lawn. An American flag hung from the front porch. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway. It was the picture of suburban normalcy. Robert Morrison left for his shift at the Portland Police Department every morning at 6:30. Sarah Morrison taught third grade at Riverside Elementary, leaving at 7:15. Jake, then a junior at Lincoln High School, would drive himself and his 12-year-old sister Emily to their respective schools in the Honda Civic his parents had bought him for his 16th birthday. To the neighbors, the Morrisons were the ideal family. Robert was a respected police officer, known for his firm but fair approach to law enforcement. Sarah was beloved by her students and their parents. Emily was a bright, cheerful kid who played soccer and sang in the church choir. And Jake was the golden boy. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who lived next door, would tell anyone who asked that Jake was the most helpful young man she'd ever known. Every Saturday morning, without fail, Jake would mow her lawn. He'd shovel her driveway in winter. When her cat got stuck in a tree, Jake was the one who climbed up to get it down. And he never accepted payment, always saying, "Just being a good neighbor, Mrs. Henderson." The Pattersons across the street had similar stories. When their fence was damaged in a storm, Jake had spent a weekend helping Mr. Patterson rebuild it. When their daughter graduated and they needed help setting up for a party, Jake was there. He was polite, respectful, always ready to lend a hand. At church, youth pastor David Miller considered Jake one of his most dedicated students. Jake never missed Sunday school. He'd volunteered for the mission trip to build homes in Guatemala. He was working toward his Eagle Scout badge. Pastor Miller would later tell investigators, with tears in his eyes, "I thought he was one of the good ones. I really did." Even at school, Jake seemed to be exactly what every parent hoped their teenager would be. He maintained a 3.7 GPA without any apparent effort. His teachers described him as quiet but intelligent, the kind of student who did his work, didn't cause trouble, and occasionally contributed thoughtful insights in class discussions. He was invisible in the best way. His AP English teacher would later testify. Not invisible because he was troubled or struggling, but invisible because he was just fine, competent, unremarkable. The kind of kid who makes teaching easy. Jake had a small group of friends: Tyler Chun, Marcus Reed, and David Kim. They weren't the popular kids, but they weren't outcasts either. They ate lunch together, worked on group projects together, played video games online together. Just normal teenage boys living normal teenage lives. Or so everyone thought. Because beneath the surface of this perfect facade, Jake Morrison was drowning. And nobody, not his parents, not his teachers, not his friends, not the neighbors who praised him, nobody saw it happening. Jake's journals, later recovered by FBI investigators, painted a very different picture of his internal life. The entries went back 3 years, to when he was 14, and they documented a slow descent into darkness that was methodical and chilling in its detail. The early entries were relatively normal teenage angst. Complaints about school being boring. Frustration with his father's strict rules. Typical stuff. But around the middle of his sophomore year, the tone began to shift. "Sometimes I feel like I'm watching my life from outside my body," he wrote in March of his sophomore year. "Like I'm not really here. Like I'm just an NPC in everyone else's game. They walk past me in the hallways and they don't see me. They look right through me. I could disappear tomorrow and nobody would notice." The entries grew darker. He wrote about feeling disconnected from other people, about not understanding why he was supposed to care about things that everyone else seemed to care about. He described watching his classmates laugh and socialize and feeling nothing, not jealousy, not desire to join them, just a flat emptiness. "Tyler told me his dog died and he was crying," Jake wrote. "I said I was sorry because that's what you're supposed to say, but I didn't feel sorry. I didn't feel anything. What's wrong with me?" But the most disturbing aspect of these early journals wasn't what Jake felt, it was what he didn't feel. There was no evidence of empathy, no real connection to other people, no sense that he saw others as fully human. People were objects to be studied, problems to be solved, obstacles to be navigated. His relationship with his father particularly featured prominently. Robert Morrison was a strict disciplinarian who believed in tough love. A B+ on a report card wasn't good enough. Jake needed to strive for perfect grades. Second place in a race meant he hadn't trained hard enough. Any failure was met with disappointment. Any success with the expectation of more. Dad looked at my report card today, Jake wrote. 4 A's and a B+. He didn't say anything about the A's. Just stared at the B+ for a long time. Then he said, I guess that's the best you can do. I wanted to punch him, but instead I said, I'll do better next time. Because that's what he wants to hear. Everyone just wants to hear what they want to hear. Sarah Morrison, meanwhile, was the peacemaker, constantly trying to buffer Jake from his father's harshness. But in doing so, she enabled something worse. She made excuses for Jake's increasingly odd behavior. When teachers expressed concern about dark themes in his creative writing, Sarah explained that he was just processing emotions through art. When a classmate's mother called to say Jake had made her daughter uncomfortable with intense staring, Sarah assured her that Jake was just shy and didn't know how to talk to girls. This pattern of excuse-making had been going on since Jake was young. The dead cats in the neighborhood that were never explained. The hamster that needed to be dissected for science. The playground accident that injured another child. Each incident had been smoothed over, explained away, forgotten. Jake's relationship with his younger sister Emily was perhaps the most telling indicator of his true nature, though nobody recognized it at the time. On the surface, he was a good older brother, protective, helpful, patient. But his journals revealed something different. Emily is easy to manipulate, he wrote when he was 15. She believes everything I tell her. She thinks I'm the best brother in the world. It's funny how easy it is to control people when you know what they want to hear. Dad wants to hear that I respect him. Mom wants to hear that I'm sensitive and misunderstood. Emily wants to hear that I love her. So I say those things, and they believe me. But the real turning point in Jake's deterioration came during his junior year, when he discovered online communities that gave voice to feelings he'd been unable to articulate. Forums for young men who felt invisible, ignored, rejected by society. Incel communities. School shooter discussion boards. Places where violence wasn't condemned but glorified. Jake created anonymous accounts, usernames like Invisible Boy 247 and Ghost in the Hallway. He posted hundreds of times over the course of a year, and in these posts, his mask slipped completely. He didn't have to pretend to care about other people. He could be honest about his contempt for the classmates who ignored him, about his rage at a world that made him feel small and powerless. They walk past me every day like I don't exist, he posted on Reddit. But one day they'll see me. One day they'll remember my name. He researched previous school shootings obsessively. Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland, Virginia Tech. He read the shooters' manifestos, studied their tactics, analyzed their mistakes. He watched footage of the attacks, read survivor testimonies, memorized timelines. It wasn't morbid curiosity. It was research. And through it all, nobody knew. Because Jake had learned from his years of observation exactly how to hide in plain sight. He maintained his grades. He continued his volunteer work. He showed up to youth group and cross-country practice. He was the boy next door, the helpful kid, the Eagle Scout candidate. The mask was perfect. And beneath it, he was planning murder. The catalyzing event, the thing that transformed Jake's dark fantasies into concrete plans, happened in September of his senior year. Her name was Olivia Thompson. Olivia was everything Jake wasn't. Popular, confident, kind. She was junior class president, captain of the debate team, and worked at a homeless shelter every Saturday. She had been accepted to Stanford with early admission. She was the kind of person who seemed to light up every room she entered, whose smile was genuine, who treated everyone, even the invisible kids like Jake, with basic human decency. And that was the problem. Jake had interpreted Olivia's kindness as something more. When she smiled at him in the hallway, he thought it meant something. When she said, "Good job," on a group project they'd worked on together, he convinced himself she was interested. When she sat next to him in the library one day because it was the only open seat, he took it as a sign. He wrote about her constantly in his journals, pages and pages of obsessive fantasizing about a relationship that existed only in his mind. He imagined conversations they would have, dates they would go on, a future they would build together. He created an entire fantasy world where Olivia Thompson was his girlfriend, where she saw him as special, where she chose him over everyone else. The reality was that Olivia barely knew Jake existed. She was kind to him, yes, but she was kind to everyone. It wasn't personal. It wasn't special. It meant nothing beyond basic human decency. Jake didn't realize this. Or maybe he did, somewhere deep down, but he couldn't accept it. So when Olivia started dating Marcus Johnson, the star of the basketball team, handsome and outgoing and everything Jake wasn't, it shattered the fantasy world Jake had constructed. He saw them together in the hallway one day in late September, laughing about something, Marcus's arm around her waist. Jake stopped dead, his backpack sliding off his shoulder, and just stared. Students flowed around him like water around a rock. Nobody noticed him standing there, watching, his expression slowly hardening into something cold and terrible. That night, his journal entry was different from all the previous ones. Shorter, more focused, more determined. October 15th, he wrote. That's the date. Exactly 3 weeks after I saw them together. 3 weeks to plan. 3 weeks to prepare. They ignored me when I was alive. They'll remember me when I'm infamous. Starting with her. From that moment, everything Jake did was in service of his plan. He studied his father's work schedule, memorized when Robert would be at the police station and when the gun safe would be accessible. He researched the layout of Lincoln High School, identifying blind spots in security coverage, noting the locations of cameras, timing how long it took for the school resource officer to respond to various parts of the building. He made lists. First, a list of targets, people who had to die. Olivia was at the top. Marcus was second. Others followed, the popular kids, the ones who seemed to float through life effortlessly while Jake struggled just to feel real. Then came the logistics list, what to wear, what route to take, how to maximize casualties while minimizing his chances of being stopped too soon. He watched videos of previous school shootings, not with horror, but with the analytical eye of a student studying for an exam. He noted what worked and what didn't. He learned from other shooters' mistakes. He planned how to create chaos that would benefit him, how to use the school's own emergency procedures against itself. And he wrote a manifesto, 47 pages, meticulously typed and saved on his laptop in a hidden folder. It was titled, For Those Who Never Saw Me, and it laid out his grievances in painful detail. He wrote about feeling invisible his entire life, about watching other kids make friends effortlessly while he struggled to connect, about parents who saw him as a project rather than a person, a father who demanded perfection, and a mother who smothered him with misguided protection, about a school system that only cared about students who caused problems or got perfect grades, ignoring the ones in the middle like him. He wrote about Olivia, pages and pages about the girl who should have been mine, about how she represented everything wrong with the world, how the beautiful, popular, successful people move through life without consequences while people like him were ignored and forgotten, about how her rejection was the final proof that he would never matter unless he made himself matter. They'll remember October 15th, he wrote in the manifesto's conclusion. They'll remember my name. They'll analyze every moment of my life, trying to understand why I did it. And maybe, finally, they'll see me, really see me, not the helpful neighbor boy, not the quiet kid in class. Me, the real me, the one who was here all along, screaming into a void that never screamed back. It was delusional, narcissistic, the product of a mind that had lost all touch with reality. But it was also methodical, organized, the work of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. In the 3 weeks between seeing Olivia with Marcus and October 15th, Jake began saying goodbye in ways that nobody recognized. He gave Emily his skateboard, telling her he didn't need it anymore. She thought he was just being nice. He hugged his mother more than usual. She thought he was finally opening up emotionally. He was unusually polite to his father. Robert thought his tough love was finally paying off. He gave away his collection of comic books to Tyler Chin. I'm just clearing out my room, he explained. Tyler didn't think anything of it. His art teacher, Mrs. Wong, noticed one thing. Jake's final art project was a charcoal drawing of Lincoln High School engulfed in flames, with shadowy figures running from the building. Some were on fire. When she asked him about it, Jake smiled and said, "It's called transformation. Sometimes things have to burn down before they can be rebuilt." Mrs. Wong reported it to the school counselor, Kelly Martinez. Martinez called Jake in for a meeting. They talked for 20 minutes. Jake explained that it was just symbolic art about institutional change. Martinez, who had 39 other students on her schedule that day, made a note in Jake's file and moved on. No follow-up. No parental notification. Just a note that would later be used as evidence of a system that failed. On October 14th, the night before the shooting, the Morrison family had dinner together like they did every Thursday. Robert talked about a case he was working on. Sarah discussed parent-teacher conferences coming up. Emily showed off her report card, all A's and 1B. Jake was quiet, as usual, but not unusually so. After dinner, Jake went to his room. He pulled out his journal and made his final entry. Tomorrow, he wrote. Tomorrow I become real. Tomorrow they see me. Tomorrow I stop being invisible. Whatever happens, it'll be better than this. Better than being nothing. Better than not existing. If I'm going to be erased anyway, I might as well go out making noise. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, going over the plan again and again, thinking about what he was about to do, and feeling nothing. No fear, no remorse, no doubt. Just a flat, hollow emptiness where normal human emotions should have been. October 15th, 2024, dawned clear and cold. Jake woke at 6 a.m. before his alarm. He showered, got dressed in cargo pants with deep pockets and a black hoodie. He looked at himself in the mirror for a long time, studying his face like he was trying to memorize it. Downstairs, his family was at breakfast. Sarah had made pancakes, Jake's favorite. Emily was scrolling through her phone, laughing at something. Robert was reading the news on his tablet, drinking coffee. "You're up early," Sarah said, smiling at Jake as he entered the kitchen. "Wanted to get to school early. Study for a test." The lie came easily. There was no test. Jake ate breakfast slowly, watching his family, memorizing them. This was the last time he'd ever sit at this table as a free person. The last time they'd all be together as a family. After today, everything would be different. Everything would be destroyed. But he felt nothing about it. No sadness, no regret. Just that same flat emptiness. When it was time to leave, Jake did something unusual. He hugged Emily tight. "Love you, Squirt. Be good." Emily laughed. "You're being weird." He kissed his mother's cheek. "Thanks for everything, Mom. Really, everything." Sarah looked pleased. "Have a good day, sweetie." He nodded at his father. "See you." Robert didn't look up from his tablet. "Don't be late." Those were the last words Robert Morrison would ever speak to his son as a free person. Don't be late. The irony would haunt him forever. Jake drove Emily to Riverside Middle School first, watching her run into the building with her backpack bouncing. She turned and waved at him. He waved back. Then he sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes, waiting to make sure she was inside and safe. Whatever else he was, he didn't want Emily at Lincoln High when he did what he was about to do. At 7:15, he drove back to his house. Both parents had left for work. He was alone. He went to his parents' bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer where he knew his father kept the combination to the gun safe written on a piece of paper. Robert Morrison, a police officer who should have known better, who trained other cops on weapons safety, had written down the combination and left it in an unlocked drawer. 47-23-89. Jake input the numbers. The safe opened. Inside were 5 weapons. A standard police-issue Glock handgun, a hunting rifle, a shotgun, and an AR-15 rifle with 4 high-capacity magazines. Jake took the AR-15. It was heavy in his hands, heavier than he'd expected. He checked the chamber, verified it was unloaded, then took all 4 magazines down to the kitchen. He sat at the breakfast table where his family had eaten pancakes an hour ago, and he loaded 120 rounds into those magazines. 30 rounds per magazine. His hands were steady. He'd practiced this motion dozens of times in his head. When he was done, he put the loaded magazines in the deep pockets of his cargo pants. He took one more, the one he'd already loaded the night before, and slid it into the rifle. Click. The sound was satisfying somehow. Final. He went to his room and got his guitar case. It was perfect, long enough to hold the rifle, innocent looking enough that nobody would question it. He placed the AR-15 inside carefully, closed the case. At 7:45, Jake Morrison walked out of his house for the last time as an anonymous nobody. By 8:15, his name would be known worldwide. The drive to Lincoln High School took 12 minutes. Jake parked in his usual spot in the student lot, spot B47. He sat there for 10 minutes, the guitar case across his lap, watching other students arrive. They were laughing, talking, living their lives with no idea what was about to happen. Jake didn't feel nervous. He didn't feel excited. He just felt nothing. An empty shell going through pre-programmed motions. At 8 o'clock, he got out of his car, locked it, walked toward the school building carrying the guitar case. 3 students passed him on the way in. None of them looked at him. Invisible, as always. He entered through the east side entrance, the one that was supposed to be locked, but never was because teachers used it to step outside for smoke breaks. Security camera number 7 would later show him walking in at 8:02 a.m., guitar case in hand, expression calm. He walked down the first floor hallway to the stairs, up to the second floor. The hallway was moderately busy, about 50 students at their lockers, chatting, getting ready for first period. Jake went to his locker, number 1247. He set the guitar case down, opened his locker, pulled the rifle out. This was the moment. The moment he went from Jake Morrison, nobody, to a name that would be remembered forever. Several students walked past him. Most didn't notice. The ones who did assumed it was a prop, maybe for drama class, maybe for a video project. It was 2024 in America. Teenagers were so desensitized to images of guns that seeing one in a school hallway didn't immediately trigger alarm. Jake closed his locker, left the guitar case on the ground, chambered around in the AR-15. The metallic sound echoed in the hallway, and a few students turned to look. He walked toward the library, where he knew Olivia would be. She always studied in the library before first period. At 8:03 a.m., Jake pulled the fire alarm. Immediately, bells shrieked throughout the school. 2,000 students began moving toward exits. The hallways flooded with people. Chaos. Confusion. Exactly what Jake wanted. He raised the rifle. The school shooter next door had stopped being invisible. What happened next lasted exactly 6 minutes. 6 minutes that left 7 people dead, 12 wounded, and 2,000 traumatized. 6 minutes that were captured on 12 security cameras from multiple angles. 6 minutes that would be analyzed frame by FBI investigators, replayed on news channels, and etched into the collective trauma of a community. But this isn't a story that glorifies violence or dwells on the graphic details of murder. Those 6 minutes destroyed 7 families completely, and they deserve to be remembered as people, not as victims, not as statistics, not as plot points in someone else's dark story. Emma Rodriguez was 16 years old. She'd been accepted to Rhode Island School of Design, with early admission her dream school. She was president of the art club and had spent the previous weekend painting a mural in the children's wing of the local hospital. She wanted to be an animator for Pixar someday. She was standing at her locker when Jake fired the first shot. She died instantly, never knowing what happened. Her parents, Maria and Carlos, would later say that the worst part wasn't just losing Emma, it was losing who Emma would have become. All that potential, all that kindness, all that art she would have created erased in a fraction of a second. Michael Chun was 15, a math prodigy who'd competed in national mathematics competitions since middle school. He'd told his father he wanted to cure cancer someday. Dr. Wei Chun, a research oncologist, believed him. Michael had the mind for it. He was running for the stairs when Jake shot him in the back. He fell face first and didn't get up. His parents would later establish a scholarship in his name for students pursuing STEM fields. It was the only way they could think to honor the future their son would never have. Coach Tom Bradley was 43 years old and had been teaching at Lincoln High for 20 years. He coached cross country and track. He was the kind of teacher who stayed late to help struggling students, who gave second chances, who believed in kids even when they didn't believe in themselves. When he heard gunshots, his first instinct wasn't to run, it was to run toward the danger, to try to stop it, to protect his students. He saw Jake in the hallway and shouted, "Jake, put it down. We can help you." Jake shot him 3 times. Coach Bradley fell outside his own classroom, where inside, 30 terrified students were barricading the door with desks. His wife Amanda and their 2 daughters, Sophie and Grace, ages 10 and 8, would never get to say goodbye. The last time Sophie saw her father, he was leaving for work that morning, promising to help her with her science project that evening. Jessica Williams was 17, captain of the dance team, and one of the nominees for Homecoming Queen. She was planning to attend USC's dance program in the fall. She had an infectious laugh and a habit of making friends with everyone. When Jake entered the library, Jessica tried to run. She made it 3 steps. Her parents, Robert and Tracy, would say later that they couldn't enter Jessica's bedroom for 8 months after her death. Her homecoming dress was still hanging in the closet, waiting for a dance that would never happen. David Park was 14, a freshman who'd just moved to Portland from South Korea the previous year. His parents had immigrated for a safer life, in America, better schools, less violence, more opportunity. David was shy but had just started to come out of his shell. He'd joined a robotics club and made his first real friends. He was hiding under a table in the library, crying quietly, when Jake found him. Jake looked at him for a moment, this terrified child, and felt nothing. David begged for his life in a mixture of English and Korean. It didn't matter. His parents would return to South Korea after the trial, unable to stay in the country that had promised safety and delivered tragedy. Principal Margaret Foster was 58 years old with 30 years in education. She'd been principal of Lincoln High for a decade and was 2 years from retirement. She knew every student by name. She attended their sports games and theater performances. She wrote personal notes on report cards. When she heard there was an active shooter, she grabbed her radio and ran toward the library, broadcasting Jake's name to all staff. Jake Morrison is the shooter. Repeat, Jake Morrison, giving police critical information that would save lives. She found Jake in the hallway and tried one last time to reach him. Jake, please stop. We can help you. Jake's response was to shoot her 3 times. She died trying to save her students. Her husband James would tell reporters later that Margaret had always said, "These kids are my kids too." She meant it. And finally, Olivia Thompson, 16 years old, student body president, volunteer at the homeless shelter, Stanford bound, kind to everyone. She was hiding in the cafeteria with 200 other students when Jake found her. She was under a table with her boyfriend Marcus. Jake walked through that cafeteria methodically, looking specifically for her. When he found them, he said 4 words. "You were supposed to choose me." Marcus tried to shield her. Jake shot him twice. Marcus survived by playing dead. Then Jake shot Olivia 3 times. She died within minutes, Marcus holding her, her blood soaking his shirt. Her last words were, "Tell my mom I love her." Marcus would spend months in physical therapy and years in psychological therapy. He would never fully recover from watching the girl he loved die in his arms. Olivia's mother, Patricia, would later write a book called 7 Lives Stolen about her daughter and the other victims. She would become a vocal advocate for gun control and mental health reform. But first, she would have to survive the trial where she'd have to look at her daughter's murderer every single day. By the time police SWAT teams entered the building at 8:09 a.m., Jake Morrison was surrounded in the cafeteria. 15 officers had their weapons drawn, shouting commands. Jake stood there, rifle in hand, looking at them. For a moment, it seemed like he might raise the weapon. Suicide by cop, the ultimate finale. Some of the officers later said they hoped he would. It would have been cleaner than a trial. But Jake surprised them. He dropped the rifle, got on his knees, put his hands on his head, surrendered without resistance. Because he didn't want to die. He wanted to be famous. And to be famous, he had to survive. As officers handcuffed him and read him his rights, Jake Morrison smiled. Not a big smile, just a small, satisfied smirk, like he'd just accomplished something important. Outside, parents were arriving in droves, frantic, screaming their children's names. The reunification center was set up at a church 3 blocks away. Some families were joyfully reunited with their children. Others waited and waited, refusing to believe the worst until someone official finally came to tell them that their child was never coming home. Maria Rodriguez collapsed when she was told about Emma. Carlos had to be physically restrained from running toward the school. Dr. Waitchin sat in his car in the church parking lot, staring straight ahead, unable to process the words, "Your son is deceased." Amanda Bradley had to tell her daughters that Daddy wasn't coming home. Patricia Thompson screamed so loudly that people 3 streets away heard it. The news spread instantly. School shooting at Lincoln High School in Portland, Oregon. Multiple casualties. 17-year-old student in custody. Within an hour, it was national news. Within 3 hours, international. The same cycle that had played out after Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Parkland, after Virginia Tech. After too many to name, the same cycle began again. Politicians offered thoughts and prayers. Activists demanded action. Gun control advocates renewed calls for reform. Second Amendment advocates said this wasn't about guns, but about mental health. Mental health advocates pointed out that the vast majority of people with mental illness aren't violent. Everyone talked. Nobody listened. Nothing changed. But for 7 families in Portland, Oregon, everything had changed. Forever. The investigation moved quickly because Jake Morrison had made it easy for them. He'd documented everything. The journals, the manifesto, the browser history, the social media posts under anonymous usernames, it was all there. A roadmap of his descent into violence. FBI Special Agent Marcus Davis, a specialist from the Behavioral Analysis Unit, led the investigation. He'd studied school shooters for 15 years and had developed a profile of the typical perpetrator. Jake Morrison checked every single box. These individuals usually display a combination of factors. Davis would later testify at trial. Social isolation, feelings of persecution, access to weapons, fascination with previous shootings, and a triggering event that pushes them from fantasy to action. Morrison showed all of these signs. The question isn't how this happened. The question is why nobody stopped him when the signs were clearly visible. That question would haunt everyone who'd known Jake. Teachers who'd seen his dark artwork. The school counselor who'd met with him once and cleared him. The neighbors who'd thought he was helpful. The youth pastor who'd believed he was faithful. The friends who'd noticed he was getting quieter but hadn't pushed. Tyler Chun, Jake's best friend since 6th grade, gave an interview to investigators that was heartbreaking in its honesty. Senior year, Jake got really quiet. Like, more than usual. I asked if he was okay a few times. He always said he was fine. I believed him because I wanted to. Because the alternative that something was really wrong was too scary to think about. So I just didn't. And now Emma's dead. Michael's dead. Coach Bradley's dead. Because I didn't push harder. Because I took fine as an answer when I knew it wasn't true. Tyler would spend years in therapy dealing with survivor's guilt and the knowledge that he'd had the opportunity to see the warning signs and had chosen not to. Mrs. Patricia Wong, Jake's art teacher, was equally devastated. She'd reported Jake's disturbing artwork not once but twice. But in a system where one counselor was responsible for 2,000 students, where funding for mental health services had been cut repeatedly, where teachers were told to handle everything from education to emotional support to active shooter preparedness in that system, a couple of reports about dark artwork got lost. I saw it, Mrs. Wong told investigators, crying. I saw something wrong in that boy. I reported it. I did everything I was supposed to do. But it wasn't enough. The system failed. And 7 people paid for that failure with their lives. The digital evidence was even more damning. Jake's Reddit account, Invisible Boy 247, had made over 1,200 posts in 18 months. The early posts were on forums for depression and social anxiety, concerning, but not alarming. But over time, his posts migrated to darker corners of the internet. Incel forums, boards where school shooters were discussed not with horror, but with fascination and even admiration. Society treats us like NPCs. He'd posted 6 months before the shooting. Background characters that don't matter. But what happens when an NPC decides to become a main character? When invisible becomes infamous? 3 months before the shooting. Sometimes I understand why they snapped. When you're erased every single day, when nobody sees you, when you stop existing, violence is the only thing that makes you real again. 1 week before, October 15th. Mark your calendars. You'll remember that date. The post had gotten 17 upvotes and 4 comments. None of them said, "This sounds like a threat. We should report this." They said things like, "Hell yeah, brother," and "Can't wait to see what happens." The FBI shut down the forum immediately after the shooting, but the damage was done. Jake Morrison had found a community that validated his darkest thoughts, that normalized violence, that treated murder as a legitimate response to feeling invisible. The most chilling piece of evidence was Jake's manifesto. 47 pages of grievances, justifications, and detailed planning. It was titled, "For Those Who Never Saw Me," and it laid out Jake's worldview with disturbing clarity. He wrote about his father's emotional abuse, the impossible standards, the constant disappointment, the feeling of never being good enough. This part, at least, was verified by his journals, and would become central to his defense strategy. He wrote about his mother's enabling, how she'd made excuses for him his entire life, how she'd protected him from consequences, how this had actually made things worse because he'd never learned accountability. Sarah Morrison would later say this was the hardest thing to read, knowing that her attempts to protect her son had contributed to creating a monster. He wrote about school, about feeling invisible, about being the student nobody noticed, about watching popular kids coast through life while he struggled just to feel real. But when investigators interviewed his classmates, they got a different picture. Jake wasn't bullied. He wasn't an outcast. He was just average. And in his mind, being average was the same as being nothing. And then he wrote about Olivia. Pages and pages about Olivia Thompson, the girl who'd been kind to him and whom he'd interpreted as being in love with him. It was delusional, narcissistic, the product of a mind that had lost all touch with reality. He'd built an entire fantasy relationship with her, and when reality refused to conform to his fantasy, he'd decided reality had to be punished. She was supposed to be mine, he wrote. She smiled at me. She talked to me. She saw me when nobody else did. But it was a lie. She was just being nice. Like I was a charity case. Like I was worth pity but not love. So she chose him instead. Marcus, the basketball star. Of course she did. Pretty girls always choose the Marcus Johnsons of the world. They never choose the Jake Morrisons. Well, now she'll never choose anyone. And that's fair. If I can't have her, nobody can. Patricia Thompson would later say that reading those words, understanding that her daughter had been murdered because she'd committed the crime of being kind to someone, was almost more than she could bear. The manifesto concluded with Jake's plan in detail. The date, the time, the route he'd take through the school, the targets he'd prioritize. It was all there, written weeks in advance. This wasn't a spontaneous breakdown. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was premeditated, calculated murder. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh read that manifesto and knew she had a case that was almost impossible to lose. The evidence was overwhelming. The defendant had been caught on camera. He'd confessed. He'd documented his planning extensively. There was no question of guilt. The only question was punishment. And given that Jake Morrison was 17, that question was more complicated than it might seem. The trial began 9 months after the shooting, in July of 2025. By then, the media frenzy had died down slightly. There had been 2 other mass shootings in the interim. Because America's attention span for tragedy is limited, but locally, the case remained the only thing anyone could talk about. The courthouse steps were lined with protesters representing both sides of various debates. Gun control advocates held signs reading "How many more?" and "Enough is enough." Pro-gun activists countered with "Don't blame the tool" and "Mental health, not gun control." Some held photos of Jake with red slashes through them. Others held photos of the 7 victims. Inside the courthouse, security was unprecedented. Metal detectors at every entrance. Armed guards in every hallway. The courtroom itself had 12 uniformed officers, more than usual, because threats had been made. Some people wanted Jake dead. Others wanted the trial to somehow exonerate him. Nobody was thinking clearly. Judge Patricia Hendricks was a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over hundreds of criminal cases in her 2 decades on the bench. She'd seen murderers and thieves and fraudsters and predators. But this case, she would later say, was different. Because every time she looked at Jake Morrison in his orange jumpsuit, she saw a child. A 17-year-old boy who'd done monstrous things. And that contradiction, child versus monster, was what made this case so difficult. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who was 53 years old and had been handling major criminal cases for 25 years. She was the mother of a Lincoln High graduate and had personally known Coach Bradley. This case was, for her, deeply personal. Her goal was simple: life without parole. The defense was handled by public defender Marcus Reed, a 40-year-old who'd been assigned this case because nobody else wanted it. Defending school shooters made you a pariah in your own community. Reed had received death threats. His car had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted "Monster Defender" on his house. But Reed believed, deeply and fundamentally, that everyone deserved a defense. That was America. That was the Constitution. Someone had to do it. His task was nearly impossible. You can't argue innocence when your client was caught on camera. You can't argue insanity when the court psychologist says your client was legally sane. All you can argue is mitigation, that despite the horrible nature of the crime, there are reasons for mercy. Reed's strategy would be to frame Jake as a victim of abuse, of mental illness, of a system that failed him. It wasn't a strategy designed to get an acquittal. It was designed to avoid the harshest sentence possible. Jury selection took 3 weeks because finding impartial jurors was nearly impossible. Everyone in Portland had an opinion about the Lincoln High shooting. Everyone knew someone who'd been affected. But eventually, they assembled a jury of 12, 6 men, 6 women, ranging in age from 25 to 68, representing different races, backgrounds, and perspectives. All of them promised to follow the evidence and the law, even when their emotions screamed for vengeance. D.A. Walsh's opening statement was powerful and straightforward. She stood before the jury, made eye contact with each of them, and spoke in a clear, firm voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a complicated case. On October 15, 2024, the defendant, Jake Morrison, took his father's AR-15 rifle, drove to Lincoln High School, and murdered 7 people. He planned it for months. He documented his planning in journals and a manifesto. He was caught on security cameras. He confessed. The only question before you is, will you hold him accountable? She walked the jury through the evidence methodically. The journals showing months of planning. The manifesto detailing his intentions. The security footage showing him methodically hunting his victims. The survivor testimony describing his cold, calculated violence. She showed photos of the 7 victims, not crime scene photos, but photos of them alive, smiling, full of life and potential. These weren't just statistics, Walsh said, her voice thick with emotion. Emma Rodriguez was going to be an animator. Michael Chun was going to cure cancer. Coach Bradley was going to watch his daughter's graduate. Jessica Williams was going to dance at USC. David Park was going to build robots. Principal Foster was going to retire and finally travel with her husband. Olivia Thompson was going to change the world from Stanford. All of that potential gone. Because Jake Morrison decided that his feelings mattered more than their lives. She concluded by pointing at Jake. The defense will tell you he's a victim. That he was abused. That he was mentally ill. That he needed help. Maybe that's all true. But on October 15th, he didn't seek help. He sought revenge. And 7 innocent people paid with their lives. Find him guilty. Give them justice. Marcus Reed's opening was necessarily different. He couldn't deny the facts, so he had to reframe them. This is a tragedy, he began. 7 people are dead. 12 are injured. A community is shattered. And Jake Morrison pulled that trigger. We're not here to deny that or excuse it. We're here to ask, why? He walked the jury through Jake's childhood, the emotional abuse from a demanding father, the enabling from an overprotective mother, the isolation and depression that nobody addressed. He talked about the warning signs that were ignored, the mental health system that failed, the online radicalization that nobody stopped. Jake Morrison is guilty, Reed said. But he's also a victim of every adult who saw the warning signs and did nothing. A victim of a father who treated him like a project instead of a person. A victim of a mental health system that saw him once and sent him away. A victim of an online world that normalized violence and radicalized lonely young men. He paused. Let that sink in. We're not asking you to forgive him. We're not even asking you to like him. We're asking you to understand that this didn't have to happen. That with the right intervention at the right time, 7 people would still be alive. And in that understanding, find the mercy to not completely give up on a 17-year-old boy. Throughout both opening statements, Jake sat at the defense table, his face expressionless. Reed had coached him extensively on courtroom demeanor. Show remorse, Reed had told him over and over. Look sad. Look like you understand the gravity of what you did. Give the jury a reason to show you mercy. But Jake couldn't do it. Or wouldn't. He sat there with that same flat, empty expression he'd worn since his arrest. When Walsh talked about his victims, he didn't react. When Reed talked about his troubled childhood, he didn't nod in agreement. He just sat there, looking at nothing, feeling nothing. Several jurors later said that Jake's demeanor during the trial affected their decision more than any evidence did. because all the testimony about mental illness and abuse became less convincing when they could see with their own eyes that Jake Morrison felt no remorse whatsoever. The prosecution's case took 3 weeks and was devastating in its thoroughness. Walsh called 47 witnesses, presented hundreds of pieces of evidence, and built a case so solid that even Reed admitted privately there was no chance of acquittal. The first week focused on the crime itself. Forensic experts testified about the ballistics, the timeline, the physical evidence. Security footage was played edited to remove the graphic deaths, but still showing Jake's methodical movements through the school. Audio from 911 calls captured the chaos and terror of those 6 minutes. Then came the survivors. Testimony from students who'd watched their friends die. Teachers who'd barricaded classrooms. The school resource officer who'd exchanged fire with Jake and wounded him. Each testimony was more heartbreaking than the last. Marcus Johnson, Olivia's boyfriend, testified about watching her die in his arms. He broke down on the stand, unable to finish his testimony, and had to be excused. The jury watched him sobbing, and several of them cried too. When they looked at Jake to see his reaction, they saw nothing. No tears, no remorse, no recognition of the pain he'd caused. Just that empty stare. Emily Patterson testified about hiding in the library, about watching David Park beg for his life before Jake shot him. He was crying, she said, her voice shaking. He was saying something in Korean. I think he was calling for his mother. And Jake just looked at him. No expression. Then he shot him. Like David wasn't even human. Like he was just nothing. Tyler Chun, Jake's former best friend, testified about the warning signs he'd missed. Senior year, Jake got really quiet. Gave away his stuff. Said weird things sometimes. I asked if he was okay. He said he was fine. I didn't push because I didn't want to know if he wasn't. And now I have to live with that forever. The second week brought expert testimony. FBI behavioral analyst Marcus Davis explained the profile of a school shooter and detailed how Jake fit it perfectly. This was not a spontaneous act, Davis testified. This was months of planning. Morrison researched previous shootings, studied tactics, chose his targets carefully. This was an execution of a well-thought-out plan. The court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, testified about her evaluation of Jake. He suffers from major depressive disorder and displays strong narcissistic personality traits, she explained. However, he understood right from wrong. He knew killing was illegal. He knew it would hurt people. He chose to do it anyway. This meets the legal definition of sanity. Then came the victim impact testimonies. This was the hardest part of the trial for everyone present. One by one, the families of the victims took the stand and described their loss. Maria Rodriguez, Emma's mother, could barely speak through her tears. Emma was my light, she said. She was going to bring color to the world. Now her room sits empty. I can't pack it up. I can't accept that she's gone. She was 16. 16. She'd barely started living. Dr. Wei Chun, Michael's father, was more composed, but somehow that made it worse. My son told me he wanted to cure cancer when he was 10 years old. I believed him. He had the mind for it. Now that mind is gone. Shot in the back while running for his life. He was 15 years old. Amanda Bradley, Coach's widow, brought her daughters Sophie and Grace with her. The sight of those 2 little girls 8 and 10 years old holding photos of their father broke everyone in the courtroom. My husband ran toward danger to protect students, Amanda said. That's who he was. And now my daughters ask me every night when Daddy's coming home. How do I explain that a child with a gun killed their father? How? But the most powerful testimony came from Patricia Thompson, Olivia's mother. She walked to the stand carrying a photograph of Olivia in her homecoming dress, the dress she'd been wearing when she was murdered. Patricia stood there for a moment, just looking at Jake. Then she exploded. Look at me, she screamed. Look at what you did. My daughter was kind to you. That's all she did. She smiled at you in the hallway like she smiled at everyone, because that's who she was. And you decided that meant she owed you something. That she owed you her life, her love, her future. And when she didn't give you what you wanted, you killed her. Patricia was sobbing, her body shaking with rage and grief. She was going to Stanford. She was going to change the world. She volunteered at a homeless shelter every Saturday. She was kind to everyone. Everyone. Even you. Especially you. And you murdered her for it. She turned to the jury, her voice breaking. He took my baby from me. My only child. My whole world. And you know what the worst part is? When I read his manifesto, when I saw what he wrote about her, he never knew her. He created some fantasy version of Olivia in his head, and when the real Olivia didn't match his fantasy, he decided she had to die. He didn't kill my daughter. He killed his imaginary girlfriend. My real daughter, the kind, beautiful, brilliant girl I raised, he never even saw her. She was invisible to him, just like he felt invisible to everyone else. Patricia couldn't continue. She collapsed, had to be helped from the stand. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of crying from the families, from the jurors, from some of the reporters. And Jake Morrison sat there, expressionless, feeling nothing. That night, Marcus Reed went to the jail to meet with his client. "Jake," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "you have to show something tomorrow. Anything. The jury thinks you're a robot. You're destroying your own case." Jake looked at him with those empty eyes. "Why should I pretend to feel things I don't feel? Isn't that what got me here in the first place? Pretending to be what everyone wanted me to be. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison," Reed said. "Better than being invisible," Jake replied. The defense's case began in the third week and was doomed from the start. Reed called expert witnesses to testify about adolescent brain development, about how the prefrontal cortex isn't fully formed until age 25, about how this impairs judgment and impulse control. Jake Morrison's brain was not fully developed, testified Dr. Robert Chong, a neuropsychologist. At 17, the parts of the brain responsible for understanding consequences, for controlling impulses, for processing empathy, these were not fully formed. It was technically true, but D.A. Walsh's cross-examination was devastating. "Dr. Chong," she asked, "how many 17-year-olds are there in America?" "Approximately 4 million. "And how many of them commit mass murder?" "Very few. So having an underdeveloped brain doesn't cause murder, does it?" "No, but it's a contributing factor." "Thank you, doctor." Reed called a trauma specialist, Dr. Linda Martinez, who testified about the emotional abuse Jake had suffered from his father. She'd reviewed Jake's journals and found clear evidence of psychological trauma, the impossible standards, the constant criticism, the emotional neglect. This kind of sustained psychological abuse can create significant trauma, Dr. Martinez explained. It can lead to feelings of worthlessness, rage, a distorted sense of reality. Jake Morrison was being damaged every single day by a father who saw him as a project rather than a person. Again, technically true. But again, Walsh's cross-examination undermined it. "Dr. Martinez, millions of children have strict parents. How many become mass murderers?" "Very few, but..." "And isn't it true that most people who experience abuse don't become violent?" "Yes. So abuse doesn't excuse murder, does it?" "No, but it provides context." "Thank you." Reed's star witness was supposed to be Robert Morrison, Jake's father. Robert was supposed to testify about his strict parenting, essentially take the blame, give the jury someone else to be angry at besides Jake. But Robert couldn't do it. The guilt was too overwhelming. He'd provided the gun that killed 7 people. He'd been the harsh, demanding father that pushed Jake into darkness. He couldn't walk up there and talk about it. So Reed called Sarah Morrison instead. And that decision made out of desperation would lead to the moment that destroyed any chance Jake had. Sarah took the stand, was sworn in, and Reed began his questioning. "Mrs. Morrison, can you tell the jury about Jake's childhood? About the environment he grew up in?" This was supposed to be where Sarah talked about Robert's abuse, about Jake's isolation, about the warning signs that were missed. Reed had rehearsed this with her. They had a script. But Sarah didn't follow the script. She looked at her son, this boy she'd given birth to, raised, protected, made excuses for his entire life. She looked at Patricia Thompson in the gallery, still holding that photograph of Olivia. She looked at the photos of the 7 victims displayed on easels around the courtroom. And she made a choice. The hardest choice a parent can make. She chose truth over love. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I can't do this. I can't lie anymore." What followed was an hour of testimony that didn't defend Jake, it condemned him. Sarah Morrison, tears streaming down her face, told the truth about her son that she'd been hiding for years. She described the dead cats in the neighborhood, The hamster he'd wanted to dissect, the accident on the playground that she'd always suspected wasn't an accident at all. She talked about finding his disturbing internet search history months before the shooting and choosing to believe his lies about it being for a school project. I enabled him, Sarah said. Every time he did something wrong, I made excuses. Every time someone expressed concern, I defended him. I taught him that there were no real consequences. I taught him that I would always protect him no matter what. And 7 people are dead because I prioritized my son's comfort over everyone else's safety. She looked at Jake. I love you. I will always love you. But you are not the victim here. You murdered 7 people. You planned it. You enjoyed it. And I failed every person in this room by not stopping you when I could have. Jake's face was turning red. His hands were clenched into fists. His breathing was becoming rapid. Sarah continued. The defense wants me to tell you he's a troubled child who needs help. But that's not the truth. The truth is that Jake has always lacked empathy. That he's always seen other people as objects rather than humans. That he's a narcissist who believes the world revolves around him. And I know this because I've been making excuses for it since he was 6 years old. Mom, Jake said, his voice low and dangerous. Stop. But Sarah didn't stop. She was crying openly now, her voice breaking, but the words kept coming. I'm his mother. I was supposed to protect him, but I was also supposed to protect the world from him. And I failed. I failed Emma Rodriguez. I failed Michael Chun. I failed Coach Bradley. I failed Jessica Williams. I failed David Park. I failed Principal Foster. I failed Olivia Thompson. I failed all of you. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life. She turned to Jake one final time. You are responsible for this. Not your father. Not the school. Not society. You. You made these choices. And it's time you faced that. And that's when Jake snapped. He shot to his feet, his chair crashing backward. Shut up, he screamed. You were supposed to help me. You're supposed to love me. I do love you, Sarah said quietly. That's why I'm telling you the truth. I hate you. Jake lunged toward the witness stand, and 3 bailiffs immediately moved to restrain him. He fought against them, his face contorted with rage, all pretense of the calm, remorseful defendant gone. I hate you. You're weak. You're pathetic. I should have killed you too. I should have killed all of you. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Judge Hendricks banged her gavel repeatedly. The bailiffs wrestled Jake to the ground. He was still screaming obscenities, threats, incoherent rage as they dragged him from the courtroom. His voice echoed down the hallway. They'll remember my name. I'm not invisible. I'm not invisible. The door slammed shut behind him, and the courtroom fell into stunned silence. Sarah Morrison sat in the witness box, her body shaking with sobs, having just testified against her own son and watched him finally reveal his true nature to the world. Marcus Reed sat at the defense table with his head in his hands, knowing his case was over. And the jury sat in their box, no longer needing any more testimony to make their decision. They had just seen, with their own eyes, exactly who Jake Morrison really was. The trial concluded quickly after that. Reed tried to salvage something from the wreckage, but there was nothing left to salvage. His closing argument was brief and hopeless. Jake Morrison is guilty. We all know that. But he's also 17 years old. Under the law, he's a child. And our justice system says children deserve a second chance. I'm asking you to consider that when you deliberate. To remember that he's young, that his brain wasn't fully developed, that with proper treatment and intervention, he might still be able to become something other than what he is now. Even Reed didn't sound like he believed it. Walsh's closing was powerful and final. Marcus Reed asked you to remember that Jake Morrison is 17. I'm asking you to remember 7 names. Emma Rodriguez, Michael Chun, Tom Bradley, Jessica Williams, David Park, Margaret Foster, Olivia Thompson. They deserved second chances too. They deserved to live. Jake Morrison took that from them. Find him guilty. Give them justice. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 14 minutes. When they returned, the foreman handed the verdict to the clerk. In the case of the state of Oregon versus Jacob Morrison, on the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Emma Rodriguez, how do you find? Guilty in the death of Michael Chun? Guilty in the death of Tom Bradley? Guilty in the death of Jessica Williams? Guilty in the death of David Park? Guilty in the death of Margaret Foster? Guilty. In the death of Olivia Thompson? Guilty. 7 counts of first-degree murder. 12 counts of attempted murder. Multiple firearms charges. Guilty on all counts. In the gallery, the victims' families wept with relief. It wasn't closure. There is no closure for losing a child, but it was something. Justice. Accountability. Acknowledgement that their loved ones' lives mattered. Jake sat motionless as the verdicts were read, his face pale. The reality was starting to sink in. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. On November 12, 2024, Jake Morrison stood before Judge Patricia Hendricks for the final time as she prepared to pronounce sentence. He'd been given the opportunity to make a statement, his allocution. Reed had begged him to show remorse, to apologize, to give the families something. Jake stood, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. I was lost. I was hurting. I made terrible choices. I can't undo them. I'll have to live with this forever." The words sounded rehearsed. Hollow. Empty. There were no tears. No emotion. Just words that someone else had written for him. The families sat stone-faced. It was too little, too late. Judge Hendricks looked at Jake for a long moment before speaking. "Jacob Morrison, I've presided over this court for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of criminal cases. I've seen people driven to crime by desperation, by addiction, by circumstances beyond their control. And I've seen people who chose evil knowingly and deliberately. You are in the latter category." She paused. Let that sink in. You had every opportunity to stop. Every moment between conceiving this plan and executing it was a choice. You chose to steal your father's gun. You chose to drive to school. You chose to pull that trigger. 7 times. 12 more times. Each pull of that trigger was a choice. And you made the choice to murder. The defense argued that you're a child, that your brain wasn't fully developed, that you were a victim of abuse and mental illness. Perhaps there's truth to all of that. But you planned this crime for months with sophisticated intelligence. You researched. You prepared. You documented. You hunted your victims with cold calculation. That's not the behavior of a child. That's the behavior of a predator. Judge Hendricks' voice hardened. 7 families will never be whole again. 12 survivors carry physical and psychological scars. 2,000 students will remember October 15th for the rest of their lives. A community is shattered. And you showed no remorse until you were caught. No regret until you faced consequences. Even your outburst in this courtroom wasn't about the people you killed. It was about you. About being seen. About your name being remembered. She leaned forward. "Well, your name will be remembered, Mr. Morrison. It will be remembered as a cautionary tale. As a failure. As a monster who threw away his life and 7 others for 6 minutes of infamy. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. You will die in prison, Mr. Morrison. You will never be free. You will never have a chance to hurt anyone again. And perhaps, in the decades you spend in a cell, you will finally develop the empathy you should have been born with. But that's not this court's concern anymore. You made yourself invisible to society through your actions. Now society will make you invisible through incarceration." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. Final. Irrevocable. Jake's face went white. "No," he whispered. "No, I'm only 17. I'm just a kid. You can't. I can and I have." "Bailiff, remove the defendant." As the bailiffs moved to take him away, Jake's composure finally, completely shattered. He looked at his mother, Sarah, in the gallery. "Mom. Mom. Help me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please." Sarah looked at her son, this boy she'd raised, this monster she'd created, and tears streamed down her face. But she didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as her son was taken away. "Please." Jake was screaming now, being dragged toward the door. "I don't want to die in prison. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." But it was too late. The apologies that should have come months ago, the remorse that should have stopped him from pulling the trigger, the humanity that should have saved 7 lives, it was all too late. The last thing the courtroom saw before the doors closed was Jake Morrison, 17 years old, screaming and crying as he was dragged toward the rest of his life in a cage. In the gallery, Patricia Thompson held the photograph of Olivia close to her chest and whispered, "Justice, baby. We got justice." It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. 3 years have passed since that November day. Jake Morrison is now 20 years old, though he looks older. Prison ages you quickly, especially when you're in protective custody because the other inmates want to kill you. School shooters are at the bottom of the prison hierarchy. He works in the prison library, shelving books, helping other inmates with their legal research. He's in therapy 3 times a week, court-mandated. The therapist says he's making progress, developing empathy, beginning to understand the magnitude of what he did. But progress is slow and may be insufficient. He writes letters to the victims' families. Most are returned unopened. Patricia Thompson replied once, "I don't forgive you. I will never forgive you. But I don't hate you anymore either. Hate takes energy I need for living. I hope you find some way to live with what you've done. I hope it haunts you every single day." Jake keeps that letter, reads it every night before sleep. It does haunt him. The faces of his victims. The sound of David Park crying in Korean. The look on Olivia's face before he shot her. It all haunts him now in ways it didn't then. Whether this represents genuine remorse or just regret at being caught, nobody knows. Maybe not even Jake himself. The survivors are all in different places. Marcus Johnson graduated, went to USC on scholarship, became an activist for gun control. He speaks at rallies, at schools, telling Olivia's story, trying to prevent the next tragedy. He still has nightmares about that day. He likely always will. Tyler Chin changed schools, graduated, but struggles with PTSD and survivor's guilt. He's in therapy and making progress, but he'll never forget watching his best friend become a monster. Emily Patterson is homeschooled now. She's terrified of crowds, of schools, of loud noises. She's 15 years old and her childhood ended at 12 when she hid in a library and watched people die. The 2,000 students of Lincoln High School all carry scars. Some visible, most invisible. The school has a memorial garden now with 7 trees, 1 for each victim. October 15th is a day of remembrance every year. But the school has also implemented changes. Mental health counselors, 1 for every 500 students now instead of 1 for 2,000. An anonymous threat reporting system. Training for teachers on recognizing warning signs. Security improvements. The question is, will it be enough to prevent the next one? The Morrison family no longer exists as a unit. Sarah divorced Robert the month after the trial. She lives with her sister now, works as a tutor, visits Jake once a month despite everything. Because he's still her son, she'll never abandon him, even though he destroyed everything. She started a foundation called See the Signs, dedicated to youth mental health awareness and intervention. She speaks at schools, at conferences, telling parents to really see their children, to notice the warning signs, to get help before it's too late. "I enabled my son," she tells audiences. "I made excuses for behaviors that should have terrified me. I chose love over action. And 7 people died. Don't make my mistake." Robert Morrison got sober 2 years ago after a suicide attempt. He lost his career, his family, his identity. He works construction now. He hasn't seen Jake since the trial. Can't bring himself to face the son he failed so completely. He started a program training police officers on secure gun storage. "My gun killed 7 people," he tells other cops. "I'm a police officer. I should have known better. Don't be like me. Lock up your weapons. One mistake, and you have to live with it forever." Emily Morrison is 15 now. She lives with her maternal grandparents in a different state. She changed her last name. She's in therapy twice a week. She loves her brother. She hates what he did. Both things can be true. "People ask me if I forgive Jake," she told her therapist recently. "I don't know how to answer that. He's my brother. He gave me his skateboard the morning he killed 7 people. Was that him saying goodbye because he loved me? Or was he just clearing out his stuff? I'll never know. And that's what makes it so hard." Lincoln High School still stands. The bloodstains have been cleaned. The bullet holes have been patched. The building has been repaired. But everyone who walks those halls knows what happened there. You can't repair that kind of trauma. There's a new principal now. New teachers. New students who weren't there that day. But the memory lingers. Ghost stories that kids tell. This is where Coach Bradley died. That's the table Olivia hid under. The tragedy has become part of the school's identity. Nationally, the conversation continues. Gun control advocates point to Jake Morrison as proof that we need stronger regulations. Mental health advocates say the real issue is access to treatment. School security experts recommend more measures. Politicians offer thoughts and prayers. And nothing changes. Because 3 months after Jake Morrison was sentenced, there was another school shooting. Then another. Then another. The cycle continues. America's children keep dying. We keep offering thoughts and prayers. And we keep doing nothing. But in Portland, Oregon, 7 families will never forget. 7 sets of parents wake up every morning to a world without their children. 7 futures were erased in 6 minutes by a boy who felt invisible and decided to make himself seen through violence. Emma Rodriguez would have been 19 now, probably finishing her freshman year at RISD, creating beautiful art, bringing color to the world just like she dreamed. Michael Chin would have been 18, likely at MIT, working on research that might have saved lives. His father still works at the cancer center, dedicating every successful treatment to the son who wanted to cure cancer. Tom Bradley would have been 46, still coaching cross-country, still changing lives, still being the kind of teacher every student deserves. His daughters are 13 and 11 now. They're doing okay. Amanda remarried a good man, but they still visit Dad's grave every Sunday. Jessica Williams would have been 20, dancing at USC, that infectious laugh echoing across campus. Her parents created a scholarship in her name for students pursuing the arts. David Park would have been 17, building robots, living the American dream his parents immigrated for. His parents returned to South Korea. They couldn't stay in the country that promised safety and delivered tragedy. Margaret Foster would have been 61, retired, traveling the world with James like they'd always planned. Instead, James travels alone, carrying her photograph, telling stories about a woman who gave her life trying to protect her students. And Olivia Thompson would have been 19, finishing her freshman year at Stanford, changing the world just like everyone knew she would. Her mother Patricia continues to advocate for gun control, telling Olivia's story to anyone who will listen. She was kind to him, Patricia says. That's all she did. She smiled at a lonely boy in the hallway, and he killed her for it. What does that say about our world? What does it say about us that kindness can get you murdered? It's a question America still hasn't answered. Jake Morrison sits in his cell at Oregon State Penitentiary, now 20 years old with 70 or 80 years of life ahead of him. All of it behind bars. He reads. He writes. He thinks. He claims he's changed. Claims he understands now what he did. Claims he's developed empathy. Maybe he has. Or maybe he's just learned to fake it better. Either way, it doesn't matter. 7 people are still dead. Their families are still shattered. A community is still traumatized. And Jake Morrison is still exactly where he deserves to be, invisible again, but this time by society's design rather than by accident. The boy next door who everyone thought was helpful, polite, and kind turned out to be none of those things. He was a predator hiding in plain sight, wearing a mask of normalcy while planning murder. The question that haunts everyone who knew him is simple and terrible. Could we have stopped him? The answer is yes. At 100 different points, someone could have intervened. The art teacher who reported his dark drawings. The counselor who saw him once and cleared him. The friend who noticed he was getting quieter. The mother who found his disturbing internet searches. The father who left his guns accessible. The online platforms that allowed him to radicalize. The school system that ignored the warning signs. At any of those points, someone could have said, "This isn't okay. This child needs serious help." And maybe, just maybe, 7 people would still be alive. But nobody did. Because it's easier to look away. Easier to believe everything is fine. Easier to think it won't happen here, to us, with this kid. Until it does. And then we ask ourselves the same questions we've been asking since Columbine. Since Sandy Hook. Since Parkland. Since Virginia Tech. Since too many to name. How did this happen? How do we miss the signs? How do we prevent the next one? The answers are there. More funding for mental health services. Better threat assessment protocols. Secure gun storage. Online radicalization monitoring. Taking warning signs seriously. Investing in students' emotional well-being as much as their academic performance. But implementing those solutions requires resources, political will, and a fundamental shift in how we think about youth violence. It requires admitting that thoughts and prayers aren't enough. That this is a solvable problem if we actually want to solve it. Until then, the cycle continues. Another lonely kid, Another grievance, another gun, another school, another tragedy. Different names, different faces, same story. Jake Morrison is currently serving 7 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole at Oregon State Penitentiary. He will die in prison. His name is remembered, just like he wanted, but not as a hero or a martyr or someone who made a difference. His name is remembered as a warning, as a failure, as the boy next door who everyone missed until it was too late. 7 lives were stolen. Hundreds more were shattered. A community will never be the same. And somewhere in America, right now, another Jake Morrison is sitting in his room, feeling invisible, researching school shootings, planning his moment of infamy. Will we see the signs this time? Will we intervene before it's too late? Or will we continue to offer thoughts and prayers after the fact, while doing nothing to prevent the next tragedy? The school shooter next door could be anyone's neighbor, anyone's student, anyone's son. The question is, are we paying attention?